Maddie, and I did the Sumi inkwash painting, which was developed in China during the Tang Dynasty. Sumi means black ink, and the E stands for path. The freestyle art of ink painting consists with fast and powerful quick dashes of paint lines. Sumi is East Asian inkwash painting, which usually depicts land from unseen or landscape paintings that depicts imaginary or very loose adaptations of actual views. The art was further developed into a more polished piece of art during the Song Dynasty, and East Asian East Asian inkwash painting has long inspired modern artists in the West. This art style has been used around the world, and it is painted on zhuan paper, which is in Chinese, or washi in Japanese paper, which are both highly absorbent for sumi. But they can also use silk. Inkwash paintings use a lot of tone and shading work. This is achieved by varying the brush, so depending on how hard you press the brush or how soft you press the brush determines on which it's lighter or darker. To get the type of brush style, many artists use different brushes. The brushes are usually, like the stick will be made of bamboo, and while the bristles will be made of goat, cattle, horse, sheep, rabbit, badger, hair, and different brushes had different qualities. So I did the Russian, my event was in 1792, and it was the Russians unsuccessfully tried to establish trade relations with Japan. For the first half of the 19th century, Japan was really isolated, and this is why it was very special, because it was quite unknown. Japan was also isolated because of the Saoku trade, and Saoku was the foreign relation policy of Japan, under which no foreigner could enter or could any Japanese leave the country on a penalty of death. So this left Japan very isolated, and no one crossed their border. So through the second half of the 19th century, many countries needed a new market to trade over produced goods, and countries then realised that Japan had a gateway to the Pacific Ocean, and that including Japan was very good because they could earn a lot of money, and it was easier to get to other countries. So countries such as Britain, France, and the Netherlands, including Russia, were trying to gain as much ground in Asia as they could. By these countries owning parts of Asia, it meant easier trading and more money. With more money, it meant more goods to sell and trade, which led to more and more money. So I did this painting of my interpretation of Russia trying to get a trading route with Japan. So this is Russia's boat here, and there's the Japanese here. In here it means the Edo period, because that's when it was. That's when it happened. And I used acrylic paint, and I mixed it with water to make it look like ink. And I put it on a piece of A3 white paper, and I used black backing to make it stand out in the middle. And I created this yesterday. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, hi there. Good to see you there. Alright. This is my project, and it's on Biobu. And yeah, thanks. As you can see in it's supposed to be a manila folder, and I've done my work, and yeah. Biobu is basically Japanese folding screens, and they were done in the Edo period. Here's a couple of examples. There's my bibliography. They were originally Chinese, but they moved to Japan. They were sometimes used as a status symbol too. And this is my project on the Unley War. Basically what happens is, as you can see in this thing, this guy in the middle is a Shogun, this guy is his heir, and this guy is his butler. And so his butler and some completely random guy are going to war, and this guy is the rightful heir, he's also here, and this guy's his baby here, so they're fighting for who should be the next Shogun. Then a completely different clan comes in and ruins everyone, because, shut up Jesse, because they're basically sick of all the war, so that's pretty cool. This guy's got things up to his face. And this guy is the new Shogun, a completely different guy. So obviously it's a pretty random war. Shut up, Jesse. Yeah.
Let's get like some calming background music.
So back to the
In 1274 and 1281, a pair of typhoons hit the coast of Japan and each wiped out a fleet of Mongols trying to invade Japan. In the first invasion, Mongolian Japanese met on the beaches of Japan and Japan were overwhelmed of the force of the Mongolian army and retreated. Mongolia, not knowing they had won, fearing for themselves of what they thought would have been more samurais coming back, retreated and set sail back into the sea. This is when a typhoon struck, wrecking all the ships that had set sail into Japan. Some of the here are some primary sources of Japan. This is the walls that Japan built to stop them from the second invasion. And this is a painting of it. This is a secondary source. I've made a stop motion video of the kamikaze using origami. It was very hard to set the scene. That's what I found hard. And I also have another diorama as well. And here is my stop motion. And then a tree comes along, wipes out a boat. It was quite fun to make, actually, ripping up the paper. Very good. And now this is a little thing of this. How the Mongolians tried to invade Japan, and one of these boats have already been knocked over. Thank you for watching.
Okay, well, this is my Japanese art project, and the first part I did on ukiyo-e, which are woodblock prints, and they originated during the Edo period, which was 1603 to 1867 in Japan. They normally depict everyday life in the urban centres of Japan. Many are actually posters promoting movies and stuff, theatre, so they're like movie posters nowadays. And at first ukiyo-es were paintings, and then they moved on to being prints. Okay, so the method of making ukiyo-e is first you get your piece of paper and draw the image, and then you transfer it onto another piece of paper, like tracing paper, and then you make the woodblock, and then you put ink on the woodblock, and you put the paper on top, and you press it with a kind of really hard bit of wood covered in this bark stuff, and you press it down. And then if you want to add separate colours, you have to make a different woodblock print and print them over the top with the black. These are some important artists. My part 2 is the tea ceremony. So the tea ceremony is a Japanese ceremony in which tea is consumed in a particular manner with particular procedures. It's normally green tea, and it started with the introduction of tea plants from China, because they did not grow in Japan. So, so they drink tea, and this is how the tea ceremony is performed. So you send out invitations to guests, and you clean the garden around the tea house, then you select the utensils for the day, and then you have a meeting with the hantu and the shoku, and then you clean the tea room, and then you do all this special stuff which involves cleaning each utensil when the guests are there, and then you pour the tea, and you have to do the whole ceremony for each person who's at the tea ceremony. This is my art piece I did, which is of a geisha who usually perform the tea ceremony, and the geisha are beautiful women who perform the tea ceremony, and they normally have very white base layer makeup with heavily penciled eyes and cherry red lips, and yes, that is it.
Steph, and I'm doing my project on sumi-e and the kemo restoration. Sumi-e is also known as ink brush painting, and it is an East Asian type of brush painting that uses black ink. Sumi-e was developed in China during the Tang Dynasty. Sumi-e was introduced to Japan in the Muromachi period during missionary visits. Sumi-e is spiritually rooted in Zen Buddhism. The earliest Sumi-e artists were highly disciplined monks trained in the art of concentration, clarity, and simplicity.
So as you acknowledge each other in the space.
The monks followed a rigorous schedule of meditation in preparation for painting. The technique of sumi-e. Sumi-e uses tonality and shading achieved by varying the ink density both by grinding the ink stick in water and varying the ink load and pressure within a single brush stroke. So the Kemo Restoration. The Kemo Restoration was a period of Japanese history that happened from 1333 to 1336 CE. It marks a 3-year period between the fall of the Kamakura Shogunate and the rise of the Ashikaga Shogunate, when Emperor Go-Daigo re-established imperial control. So my artwork is about when Go-Daigo was ruling before Ashikaga Shogunate took over. I created this on the 18th of November, and I used black ink, a paintbrush, and thick black paper. Thank you.
Lucky, and this is my art piece that I made for my Japanese art project. And I made this using the art style of Yamato Air, which is Japanese painting in English. And the event I chose to portray in this art piece is the leader of these 47 samurai out to avenge the death of their master, preparing for battle. And as it says here, in Japanese characters, it reads, "Ready for revenge." And how I created this was I didn't actually paint it, but I drew it and I colored in using like pencils and ink. But yeah, I didn't use any paints. That's how I made it.
Okay, well this is my Japanese ink painting, and I did it of a warrior, and this writing down here means it's like the Japanese translation of warrior in kimono, and up here this is the Japanese translation for the Onin War. So basically in my part 1 I was talking about Japanese ink paintings, otherwise known as sumi-e, and in my part 2 I was talking about the Onin War and like when it started, how it developed and stuff like that. And yeah, that's my project.
So this is my Japanese art history project, and I'll be talking about origami and the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. In part 1, I will be talking about origami, which was a very famous Japanese art in the history of Japan. In the introduction, I'll be talking about how origami is made just from folding paper without any scissors or glue. Here I'm talking about the history of it and where it originated from and where it was found. In this, I'm talking about the important artists of origami and how origami is made. Although origami isn't a specific type of paper folding, it contains many different types of objects. Here are just the links where I found all of my information. In part 2, I'll be talking about the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. In this slide, I'm talking about when and where he died and what actually happened to him. In this slide, I talk about the key people who were involved in his death and what were the short-term effects of his death. Here are the long-term effects of his death and the references where I got all of my information from. In part 3, I made some origami objects and stuck them together. This part 3 project was made by a mature young lass named Jordan Haythorne. She made it by folding some paper together, looking on the internet for ways to fold this paper together, and sticking it together. Although we know that you don't stick origami together for it to be traditional origami, she had to do this because it would not stay in the box. To sum things up, I believe that origami is, well, it looks very simple to make, but you know, when you actually make it yourself, it kind of shows you how hard it is and how easy you can muck up. And it shows how hard it can be to make things without scissors or glue or pencils and rulers or anything. So if you ever have any spare time and have some paper in front of you, why not give it a crack?
For part 1 of my project, I chose origami. It's got a brief history on it and got facts about what they used for. It's also got some work examples of some famous artists' work pieces. For part 2 of my project, I did it on the Onan War. It's got everything that's happened in it, as well as some important people, long-term and short-term effects, as well as some sources with some images. In part 3, I collided the two, put them together, and created the origami I will show you shortly. So this is how I represent the Onan War with origami. You see, I've got swords here representing the two teams fighting. I've got a dart here representing ninjas and highly trained assassins. The stars represent the nighttime, and the green one up there represents the sun, despite the fact that it's green. And down here I've also got a secret message, even though it says not a secret message, it is in fact a secret message. And that's designed to show secret messages passing from one team to the other for rebellions and that.
I'm Bo. I'm going to be talking about the Mongolian invasion and origami. First, origami. Ori means folding and kami means paper. Origami was a traditional art form in Japan that started in the 17th century, and it became a worldwide art in the 19th century. This means the art was a part of the Edo period. Origami is like a form of sculpting, starting out with a plain piece of paper and then making it into a sculpture. There are many different things to make out of origami, but the most common piece of origami is to make a crane. This is because when the nuclear bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, there were many people affected and children, including one girl in particular who was severely ill. But there was an old legend that said, if you made 1,000 paper cranes, you can get a wish. So the girl made 1,000 paper cranes, but sadly, her wish didn't come true. The artwork is created by folding paper and creasing it in many stages that create a sculpture. It takes a fair bit of concentration and skill to get the exact fold and create a frog or a boat or a crane. While origami is not really known for telling stories, it can represent something of importance and mean different things to different people. Origami originated in Japan, and origami originated not in Japan but in Germany or some European country. But it first started in Japan in 1680. But there has been evidence in other forms of origami in other countries.
Origami became famous as it was used for gifts and good luck between samurai and burnt at funerals and weddings and given as gifts. Molly Bang created the famous paper crane, and Peter Engel was perhaps the most influential origami artist of all time. Part 2, the Mongolian invasion. In 1274 and 1281, the Mongolian army tried to invade Japan to wipe out the whole country. Not only once, but twice did a typhoon strike on the exact day. And 75% of the Mongolian army's 40,000 soldiers the first time, with the Korean and the Mongolian and the Chinese all combined, in about 800 vessels with all its horses and supplies, were wiped out by this typhoon. The second time, there was over 140,000 soldiers sent in 4,100 vessels to Japan from Masan. The Koreans and Chinese suffered a lot of losses, and when the Mongols got to Japan, again the typhoon struck and wiped out most of their army. Therefore, the Japanese people won. This is a primary source of evidence. The barriers at Hakata Bay, built by the Japanese period back then. And this is a secondary source of a remake painting of the Mongolian invasion. I made the Mongolian invasion scene using origami, using Lego and A4 paper. I tried to create a stop motion, and I also created a scene of the Mongolian invasion. The hardest bit was creating the eye motion and folding the paper. I had to trim the stop motion because I had a book in front of the camera for half the film, but I still have a little bit of it. And here is a scene from it, and I'll get the invasion up. The stop motion. Half of it. That was about half of it. Anyway, that's it.
This is my history art project, and I did origami for my first art, which was the report. Origami is just the art of paper folding, and it started in the 17th century AD, and it was popularised outside Japan in the mid-1900s. For my second bit, I did the Onan War, which was a civil war that lasted 10 years, from 1467 to 1477 during the Muromachi period. In Japan, it was a dispute between the Hosokawa Katsumoto and Yamada Sozen, which escalated into a nationwide war involving the Ashikaga and a number of daimyo in many regions of Japan. Daimyo are basically were the clan leaders. They were like generals and stuff like that. Powerful territorial rulers. So it basically began as a controversy over who would become the new shogun, as the previous one didn't have any sons, so he gave it to his brother, but then he unexpectedly had a kid, and yeah. So this is my third part. It's the best. I made the holy hot leaves out of some green paper with origami, and then I just painted with some green paper and some water. And I just painted this up with thing. It's the crest of the Tokyo Gala.
Ready? 3, 2, 1. I'm Jesse Spencer, and this is part of my project. It's about wood block prints. Do you have it? And another part of part 1. And then these are the photos of part 1 that I did. These are some examples of wood block prints.
this is part 2. Part 2 was about the Onin War. And this is part 3. A woodblock print about the Onin War. And here in Japanese writing, it says Onin War. Yeah, how convenient. Yeah, the swords. And families battling. Yeah, arrows, war, blood. Yeah. And this is the written part for part 3. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Grace Reaper and this is my Japanese history project. In part 1 I'll be talking about ukiyo-e, how it's created and the history of the art. In my introduction I talk about ukiyo-e and the start of its history. So ukiyo-e is just a form of Japanese art and it means pictures of the floating world. So here I go more into depth about the history of ukiyo-e, how it got popular and how the westernization of Japan influenced the art. These are just the steps that an artist would take to create ukiyo-e. So the artist would design an image and then transfer it onto a woodblock. The woodblock would be carved using special tools and then the ink would be applied to the woodblock and onto the piece of paper. There were many famous artists at the time that ukiyo-e was popular in Japan, however these are just a few that were born and when they died. These are just some examples of some of the artists' paintings. Some are more famous than others, it just depends what people liked at the time. This is one of the most famous pieces of ukiyo-e from the Japanese time. It's the Great Wave of Kanagawa. Alright, so now we're on to part 2. In part 2 I talked about the event that I painted, the date that it occurred, the factors that led up to the event, what actually happened, the key people involved. So I painted the Mongolian invasions in Japan. There were 2 and I talked about both of them and the main leaders that were involved from the Mongolian side, and I talked about the samurai as well. Obviously there were heaps of effects on Japan after the Mongolian invasions. I've just talked about a few and the main ones. Here are just some primary and secondary sources of the invasions. On the left there's a secondary source and it's a map of where the Mongols travelled to Hakata, and on the right there's a painting of the Mongols aboard ship. And lastly there's part 3, which is the actual artwork. So I'll show you the artwork and I'll talk about how I made it and what I used to make it. So here I'm just talking about the artist, which is clearly myself, and then I talk about what I have created. Quickly, the materials I used, so it was acrylic paint, 2 canvases and paint brushes. So here I'm just talking about the artwork and how I created it. I didn't use a woodblock, I just painted it just to keep it simple, and I just sketched it onto the canvases first and then just painted over it. And finally the actual artworks I've got here. On the left is the first invasion because it's in the daytime and there's only 1 set of boats, and on the right the sky is darker, clearly because it's in the nighttime, and there are 2 sets of boats because the samurai were attacking the Mongolians in the darkness.
My thing was about manga, my Japanese project, and manga are Japanese comic books, and they're often made into Japanese cartoons or anime movies. The word manga can be translated as humorous pictures, and really, the way to tell manga is most of their characters have really full-on emotions. So when they're angry, they'll have red rosy cheeks and steam will be literally coming out of their ears and stuff. And for part 2, I did the Mongol invasion. So it was led by Kublai Khan. He was Genghis Khan's grandson.
Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan's grandson, and he wanted to take over Japan, and he failed twice. The first time was in 1274, and the second time was in 1281, I think. And this was my drawing. So this was my manga. So that was Kublai Khan there, and so he led the invasion. These were the Mongolian troops. That's where they were, so they were from Mongolia and they wanted to take over Japan in 1274, and they failed. They failed because most of the winds and seas were rough, and their boats sunk before they could get to the shore. So that happened, and pause because that's my mom. So they failed because the ships sunk before they could get to the shore, but the survivors of the Mongolian army fought still. But they failed because the Japanese built fortresses around the border of the coast, and no one could get in, including the Mongols, and the Mongols were outmanned. There were too many Japanese people, and and I made it by pretty much pencil and a few sketches and drawings, and I made it in this red book. So yeah, that was my project.
Okay.
I'm Nick, and I did my project on ukiyo-e, and it means pictures of the floating world in Japanese, and it's one of the traditional art forms in Japan, and it means the woodblock prints, and every different woodblock print is a different colour, and they dip in the ink and then they press it down onto the paper, which creates the art pieces. And this is an example, and it's called Sudden Shower at Ataki and Sunshin, I think, and it shows rain pouring on village people going across a bridge. And for my part 2, I did Shogun Oda Nobunaga's death. He was assassinated by one of his most favoured generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, and he was trying to unify all of Japan. He was one of the first shoguns to try and actually do that, and he was about 2/3 completed of unifying all of Japan when he was killed, and then only 7 years later they actually unified all of Japan. And this is a portrait of him drawn in 1590, and then there's a statue of him at Kyosu Castle in Kyosu, Japan. And so my project was a ukiyo-e style drawing that has, at the top it says, Oda Nobunaga was killed by Akechi Mitsuhide, and on this side here, that was Akechi Mitsuhide's flag, and I did that because that's supposed to be Mitsuhide, while he's killing him, and it's still not really known why he killed him, but it's thought because he didn't really want him to actually have all the power, So Mitsuhide wanted the power, so he killed him. Yeah. Stop me.
It's not. It hasn't stopped.
I've done a Sumi-e ink painting of the isolation of Japan. So Sumi-e is an art style that uses black ink. Sumi means black ink, and the E at the end of it means path. So when you put the two together, you get the path of black ink. So to create this, I got a felt tip pen just to do the writing there, and I used ink. To do all that. So the art of Sumi-e is about 2,000 years old. The monks do a scheduled meditation in preparation for painting, and to make the ink they use the finest pine branches, and they burn the pine branches with sesame and other natural oils. They also put it with a fragrance, so they make the painting smell nice. Sumi-e ink is set in a wooden mould, and it is ash dried. The ink is then wrapped in straw, then hung to age. Sumi ink can take up to 10 years or more. Okay. The period that I've chosen is when there was the isolation of Japan. This was in the Edo period. The year was 1639, and in this time the Shoguns were ruling, so that the Shoguns wanted to put Japan under isolation. There was some long-term and short-term effects. During this time, there was a invasion, there was 2 invasions, and so that would scare the people of Japan. So that would have been a long-term effect because fear of invasion stayed with them. The isolation went on for 200 years, and Shoguns were only ruling for 250 years. Thank you.
For my part one, I did Yu-Gi-Oh! Air, which is a Japanese art style. It's a woodblock print or painting, based around the 16th century. Yu-Gi-Oh! Air means pictures of the floating world in Japanese. And I did how it was traditionally created and some famous artists as well. And for my part 2, I did the Jokyo War. And the Jokyo War occurred in 1221. And it was based around an emperor called Go-Toba, and there was a huge disturbance or rebellion in Japan because of him, and a big war happened around this time as well. And for my part 3, I did a Yu-Gi-Oh! Print of Go-Toba, the emperor from the Jokyo War, and my written part of it is in here too. I read the part. And bibliography as well. Thank you.
to Edo Bay, Japan in 1854 with a letter from the US President Fillmore to arrange for commercial relations and to negotiate a treaty with Japan.